1. You're live.
You want me to move over there?
I'm live, am I?
Yeah, you're live. Yeah.
Do you want to
Start with prayer. Go on then, kick us off.
Oh, that wasn't
This is how we roll at City Life. You suggest that you do it.
Yeah.
Oh, that was mean, wasn't it? Okay then. Heavenly Father, we thank you that we're able to meet here tonight, and we thank you for David and Helen for hosting, and for Dan for coming to tell us all about Hope into Action. And we just pray that as we learn more and more about it, that we can somehow help, whether it be financial, prayer and support in some way, and that as we do that, we do it in your name. And we pray this in your name. Amen.
Amen.
Thanks, Sid.
And actually, that you suggested you do it model is probably how I ended up in this. To be
Glad I'm
fair.
not the only one.
So, I mean, I've worked for City Life since. Well, I did a voluntary year for them to start with back in 2000. I've been employed ever since in various roles. Yeah, so quite a while. Started out mainly kind of doing student work stuff, and then our students graduated and stayed at the church, got married, had kids, and then so my role began to expand. I did student work for about 10 years, but then we moved into the big old Methodist building on Burgess Road, started doing kind of community development kind of stuff. Then we did an asset transfer with the City Council and took on a community centre in Tanner Park. So my community development thing then also began to include kind of buildings and resources, and then my job title changed to something that nobody understands. So officially I'm the resource leader, whatever that means. So I look after buildings and finance and insurance, whilst also trying to make sure that those buildings are used to meet the community and to meet local needs. And so part of that has ended up meaning I got involved with kind of wider groups connecting different bodies across the city, whether that is local to kind of Swaithing and Bassett where we are, or more broadly in the city, and looking at some of what's already happening, some of the kind of strengths that are out there that we can maybe tap into and work alongside, and some of the needs that are there. And as you probably know, homelessness is quite high up on the agenda at the moment. It's the top priority for the City Council. Shouldn't have done that, that's on camera.
It's work. It's work.
This is work.
Business.
Yeah.
This is the Lord's work.
Oh no, sorry.
You've been told
That was the Lord. Can I turn my phone off?
Yeah, it's the Lord.
Yeah.
No, don't respect you.
He said turn it off.
Anyway, so been involved in Love Southampton, so connected to the City Council and some of the stuff around homelessness through that, and I am also involved locally. We have a Love Swaithing and Bassett group as part of Love Southampton, and there's a number of people there who have had connections with kind of those who are homeless, and then as a church we've been running a soup run probably for 17 or 18 years.
Which soup run is it, by the way?
Friday nights.
Is that on Appy?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Uppy's part of City Life. So we've been down that road for a long time, and for me there's quite a level of frustration. It's great going out and meeting people on the streets and being able to care for them, but it's frustrating when you don't get to have a big enough impact, or you can't offer any more, and you see people feeling trapped and not able to move on, and then you see people over and over again.
Same.
You see them for a while, then they disappear somewhere, and then they seem to reappear as though they've moved on from being on the street and then somehow returned. And there is a cycle of homelessness that people do tend to get trapped into. It may be that they move from the street into a hostel, gradually go through the kind of hostel process, end up in move-on accommodation, but by the time they're in move-on accommodation, often end up lacking support and community around them. They maybe see a support worker for an hour or two a fortnight if they're lucky, and then things in their life begin to slip, and they find that when they move on to independence they can't cope and they're back into homelessness. So the thing that really struck me about Hope into Action was how they seek to kind of end that cycle. I connected with them first a couple of years ago. I'd heard that Ed had been to Spring Harvest a few years back, and I chatted with a guy in Swathen who'd seen him, and he'd got a copy of his talk and he shared it. I thought that sounds good, and then I was bizarrely doing a bit of a tour of the country, going and visiting social enterprises, and we were setting up a project which is now called Greenhouse, which is kind of a gardening, landscaping, fencing social enterprise, working with people who've been out of work for a while, need both kind of skills, but also building self-confidence and those kind of things. So as we were doing that, we were exploring some others around to try and learn, because I've heard social enterprises aren't the easiest to start. Something like 90% of them fail. So we wanted to try and start well. So, and on one of those tours, we happened to be going past Peterborough. I thought, well, it'd be good to drop in and see Hope Interaction while we're there. So did with another guy, and we met up with Ed, and I was thoroughly impressed, not only with what they do, but their heart and their ethos behind it. While we were there, we went to visit one house that they were running, and they had a guy there who had been trafficked into the country and was kind of in enslaved labour, and he'd been set free, but he had no documents, no paperwork, no access to any kind of benefits or funding, and they housed him for 6 months and helped him through the process without any income. And compared to other housing projects that I've looked at, that is quite different, because most of them, unfortunately, the way they're set up, they're fairly tied to their financial structures. So the housing benefit coming in is utterly vital for the running of the project. Whereas these guys, they try and make that the housing benefit is vital for the running of the house. It pays the investor, and it pays for maintenance, and then they operate in faith for the rest. They'll raise grants, they'll have people give them gifts, and I thought that's kind of how we operate. Whenever we set a budget, we then go, okay, well, what else do you want us to do, God? And then we had a faith target, so we never have what we need at the beginning of any year, and we have to trust on God to bring the rest in. And he's always done it. So, with that in mind, I thought this was great. I'd love to connect more. So we began to explore opportunities of how we could work together. At that point, they offered alternative models for franchises, which they don't really offer anymore. They did this great thing called a franchise light, where they would basically do everything and we'd just provide some volunteers. I thought, wow, that sounds quite nice and easy. So we began to explore that, and then they took that off the table. Because actually what that does is it limits growth, and it prevents the locality being empowered to actually do stuff. So I thought, all right, fair enough, but it does mean we've got to go whole hog if we're going for it. So yeah, we did. I was due actually to go up and see them in May last year for a franchise assessment. They're quite good in that they want to make sure they don't dilute what they do. So they want to make sure that it's a good fit. They do a spiritual assessment on you, because one of the things they want to do, they describe themselves as having 50% of their mission being to the homeless, and 50% of their mission is to the church. So their logo, in fact, says that so Hope Interaction, enabling the church to house the homeless. So part of their role is not to just do it all themselves, but to enable the church to do it with their support. I can't remember where I was going with that, but that is their aim. And so I was due to go up in May, ended up having a heart attack, didn't go, went in October instead, and we then agreed to take on a franchise, which officially started the 1st of January.
So we're now anxious. Are you recovering okay from your...
Still alive.
So you just slid that in there.
Yeah, I didn't regard it as a big thing particularly. I know, strange. I didn't regard it as a big thing particularly because I felt absolutely fine, had no warning shots, had a heart attack at 3:20, ended up in hospital, had a stent fitted, was back on the wall by 6 o'clock, and I was feeling normal from 6 o'clock, and I haven't felt anything other than normal since. So basically I felt slightly less than normal for about 2.5 hours.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So they said I was going to need bypass surgery. They said I had moderate to severe damage of my left ventricle and its function. And then I got prayed for. I went back, had a scan, and went, oh, actually your heart's functioning perfectly. The blood flow's okay, and we can see evidence that you've had a heart attack, but there's nothing wrong with you. So it's not a big thing, but it did delay going up. Anyway, this
Thank you.
zoom in.
Right.
This is basically a little diagram of how they function. Can you see? Sorry, it's not easy. I did at least print it on A3.
Yes.
Yeah, good move.
So generally, what they would do is they either they nationally or us locally would seek an investor or a group of investors if you're willing to go and buy a house. The house then houses some tenants. A church group support the tenants, and Hope into Action kind of sit in the middle of it all, and they share stories with the investor. They provide a return on the investment. They provide an empowerment worker who oversees the house and does, I guess, the more difficult bits with the tenants. So they, if it comes down to needing to evict, for example, it'd be them that does that rather than the church volunteers,
Yes.
which they are paid for and would be skilled in. They also act. They put together a personal development plan for every tenant. So they'll go through their strengths, where they feel there's areas they want to improve on. They will look at whether budgeting's an issue. They will help them with all that kind of stuff. And then the church volunteer group will support all of that. And they will come in and they'll befriend, and they might help take them to appointments, and they might sit with them as they do a budget. They'll pray for them. All those kind of things. So the church group obviously has quite a vital role. So the primary way that the model works to prevent the cycle of homelessness is it builds community, which actually churches are very well equipped to do. We've been doing community for a long time. We have diverse groups of people who somehow, like we have in this room, get together and seem to get on with each other, and they form community, which is quite bizarre when the world looks at it. They don't. The world doesn't do it in anywhere near the same way. And so the church is uniquely equipped to be able to build community around tenants who may need extra levels of support. And so when tenants then move on out of supported accommodation, so this is regarded as temporary supported accommodation, usually for a period of around 2 years. It's the aim. It's not restricted. I met a guy the other day who's been in one of the Hope into Action houses for 4 years. So it's not unlike some places. It's not a defined 18 months, 2 years, you're out. But when people do move out and they move into independent living, they still have community around them because they've actually built relationships rather than a support worker client kind of
So
relationship.
volunteers at the house, can they, when somebody does move out into their own accommodation, are the volunteers still able to support them in some way?
Yeah.
Rather than
it's
just sort of like, see you later.
in the same way that friends would.
Brilliant.
So, but it's much more that kind of relationship by that point. So the
Yeah.
empowerment worker wouldn't have the same level of involvement. There wouldn't be a personal development plan being put together and reviewed every couple of months. But the volunteers from the church hopefully will have generated friendship and relationship and be able to continue that. So when I had a heart attack, countless friends offered help and bought random things to occupy my time because I'm not very good at sitting still and had to have a month off. And people cooked meals for us and they took the kids for play dates and those kind of things. So that's what community does. And so the aim is that across those 2 years, genuine community, loving, supportive community is built. And I like that as a model because we're good at that, and churches can do that. And because Hope into Action are obviously a Christian organisation, prayer is encouraged. We obviously, you have to comply with people's wishes. You can't force it on people, and they accept people of all, races and backgrounds and sexualities and all that. So it isn't about proselytising or forcing it down people's throats, but it is about being genuine, loving community, and that actually does bring transformation to people. The stats
we
that
actually found that at the breakfast though.
Yeah. And the stats that Hope into Action have, they they would estimate that something like 95% of homelessness is a result of a lack of love in somebody's life. So people take some kind of action because they've had a deficit of love in one way or another, whether that is, family breakdown, divorce, whatever it might be, whether that leads to a mental health issue, a drugs issue, a finance issue, if you're going through a divorce or whatever. And so they would estimate that something like 95% of people on the streets are there because of that deficit of love. And we can do something about that.
Can I just
And
ask
when you
you
put
a
it that way,
question?
it sounds quite simple, doesn't it?
Where do Hope get their money from? I'm probably a very stupid question.
So every franchise, so we paid to take on the franchise, so we get all their policies and we get their support. So there's a one-off fee, and then there's a small monthly fee, which actually reduces in proportion the more houses you have, because their estimate is you open up more houses, you're going to understand what you're doing better, you'll need less support, you don't need to pay as much, which is quite good. So they run in Peterborough, I think 14 houses. So obviously housing benefit comes in, that covers the return to investors, it covers maintenance, and then there's usually a small amount left over which funds part of what they do. And then they get grants, and they've got individuals who give to them, and they've got churches who contribute. And obviously we're aiming for a similar thing here. When we open the first house, there will be an amount of housing benefit coming in. You can't guarantee it's going to constantly be coming in if you have to evict someone, or if they, decide to go to a benefits office and change to get their rent themselves, and then they don't pay you and disappear.
That might become a problem when universal credit hits everyone.
Yes, although the housing benefit proportion of universal credit is protected when you provide exempt accommodation. But because we're providing accommodation with support, they can extract the housing benefit part and pay it direct still.
That's good.
So that adds a level of protection, which is helpful. But it doesn't stop a tenant going and saying, actually, I want to reverse that, because it's still actually their choice. So it has to be them that says, yes, I want it paid direct. Which is sensible if they're willing to do it, because it protects their licence to stay in the home, whereas if they stop paying rent, their licence is void and would have to evict. It doesn't happen immediately, you go through a process, but it's in their interest, particularly if they would struggle to ensure that they paid regularly rather than using it on something else. So we're obviously aiming for that, and there'll be an income, and that will cover part of an empowerment worker salary. It won't cover all our costs. So I have got some gifts in, one-off ones, and I've got a few people giving regularly. So it started actually, I started giving regularly. I felt challenged. Actually, I'll tell you a story. Ed Walker actually shares a little thing. There's a video on YouTube, you can go and find it, but he talks about a theology of sharing. And he says, all too often we've probably misunderstood what sharing is. So if I ask he asks his daughter to share her sweets, everyone kind of knows that actually what she's doing is giving those sweets away. She's not going to get them back. They're given away. Whereas, if you share her doll, she knows, and everyone knows at the end of the day, the doll's still hers, she'll get it back. And so he talks about this theology of sharing, where if we're called to share our wealth with the poor to ensure that no one has need, and all in the early church, everyone shared what they had. He says actually all too often we've made it that we've expected people to give, whereas for the investments, he's saying, if you look around the church and you think, okay, on average people have got 1,000 or 2 in the bank, sat in reserve somewhere. How many people would it take to actually buy a house, and they could share their investment because it's still theirs at the end of the day, and they earn a return. Now, I like that as an idea, but I would take it further. So, my son, a couple of years ago, so he's 7 now. He must have been 4 or 5. I think it was at one of his friend's 5th birthday parties, and they were at this party and they were playing all the party games as kids do, and so you do musical statues, someone wins, they get given some sweets galore everywhere, except for this one kid who just didn't seem to win anything, and so he was the only child there that hadn't got any sweets, and my son spotted this, and he decided to go and take his sweets and share them with this little boy and give them to him. And at that moment, as his father, I'm like, I felt so proud. You can tell I feel proud because it's like 2 years ago and I'm still telling the story.
Yeah.
But I felt proud to the point where I'm like, I know that I can trust you with sweets. He's never going to want for sweets anymore. He's never run out of sweets. Every time he runs low and asks, he's going to get more. That's what it did to me, you know, because I'm like, I can trust you with this. And I feel like God does the same with us, where He gives us stuff, and whether we share it or whether we give it, what it does is our generosity attracts a flow from heaven. And so, whilst we encourage people to share in the investment, I want to see people give, and I felt challenged by that. So I'm like, well, if I want to set this up, I'm going to have to give. So you know, the whole what seed have you got to what seeds for bread, what seeds for sowing? I'm like, I'm going to sow some, and so I started giving monthly, and then about a week later, someone walked past me and said, I've been meaning to talk to you. I've got £130,000 I'd like to invest in a house for you. And I hadn't spoken to them about investment. I hadn't spoken to anyone really about investment at that point. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. And then another story, I remember we were totaling up probably back in November. So this only happened probably December time. And again, it's linked to this. I remember we were sharing in a staff meeting some of the highs and lows of the year. And I was recounting that I've been out to India a few times this year. I support stuff out there, we take teams out. And somehow, as I totaled it up, we'd raised about £100,000 for India, which is building a school and a bunch of other things. And I caught myself thinking, that's exceptional, that probably won't happen again. And I felt God challenged me in saying, well, why won't it happen again? Surely if you had faith for it at that time, what was your ceiling of faith should now be your new floor. Because I was thinking, well, it's easy to raise money overseas. You know, your money goes a lot further. People see that the need's worse. So I'm thinking about Hope Interaction. I'm thinking, well, how am I going to raise 250,000 to buy a house? I'm going to get one house that could house 2 people. Or if I sent it out to India, that's going to build a couple of schools for generations to come. There's going to be thousands of lives changed. We've set up water filtration stations that transform entire villages. I'm like, oh, where's this going to come from? Anyway, God said, well, that's not your concern. All the money in the world, everything you need, I've got all the resources, it's all mine. So I repented. And literally it was kind of the next day that this guy said, 130,000. And then 2 weeks later I got a phone call saying, we've got 200,000 for you. So, what? So we've got money for the first house. The guy that's investing the 200,000 wants to be a sole investor, so we've got to invest that just on the one house. He doesn't want anyone else partnering with that. And then we're halfway to the second house.
Wow.
They've operated the same way. In the last, I think they started in 2010, so in the last 8 and a bit years, they've had something like £8.5, £9 million worth of investment, and they've never really asked. People seem to come to them. So the provision of God is there. And they've never run short in their budget, and I'm hoping we won't either. So the stage we're at the moment is I've got an investor, we've got some money, I need to find a house. 200,000 is a tricky budget because that has to include everything. So
Where do you look for that then? You must have certain areas.
well, there's areas in the city we could buy for that, but what
Not the attractive areas.
no, we need. So one of their values is ensuring that houses that are bought for tenants are in good condition. They show value to those that are going in. So it's not going to be a complete dive, and they're in good areas. Because otherwise, if they're in bad areas and people are, living bad lives and already in bad habits, that's not going to help. And ideally, because we're opening the first house and it'll be our volunteers, we would like the house within walking distance to the church. We've got plenty of stuff happening in the church. We've got debt advice, we've got Basics Bank, we've got a brunch for kind of vulnerable and out of work adults. We've got the social enterprise thing that is based there and goes out from there 3 days a week. We've got various things that they can then connect into, and volunteering opportunities as well, which may help. So we want it walking distance. The trouble with that is we're right next to the university, so it does tend to bump up the prices.
That's Flowers Estate though, isn't it?
Yeah, There is the Flowers Estate. You'd be surprised. I live on the Flowers Estate. You'd be surprised how expensive it is these days.
Oh, it's much better now than it was 15, 20
yeah.
years ago.
Cheapest house on there at the moment is
It's got
210,000.
It's
So
got all the like Pansy Road, Daisy Road,
Yeah.
Violent, which used to be called Violent Road.
yeah, I live on Violent Road.
It was Violent. It was this. And
Yeah, we used to have
Violent or violet?
It's
It's
Violent.
Violet, but everyone called it Violent.
Violent.
We used to have cars on fire on our road most days.
Crikey.
Back in the
It was
day.
quite violent. then.
Yeah. Yeah. Anyway, it's not like that now.
No, it's not.
So the 200,000, unfortunately, has to buy the house, cover stamp duty, legal fees, any renovations that are required, and there will be some because you have to make sure, you know, smoke detectors that are mains wired, fire doors, you know, decent locks, all of those kind of things is a bare minimum, let alone the rest.
So would it have to be a house, or could it not be a flat, a 2-bedroom flat or something?
It could potentially be a 2-bedroom flat. The only challenge with flats is you are very definitely sharing with a whole bunch of neighbours and have communal areas. And so if there are issues with tenants, which there could well be, let's be realistic, there probably will be at some point, that can be quite tricky on other people's lives. So they have done it in places. It's not beyond the realms of possibility, but a house is definitely preferable if we can.
Well, it probably for some tenants it would feel safer, wouldn't it? A house,
Yeah.
probably, you know, because they wouldn't necessarily want the all the other neighbours and communal bits.
Yeah.
They're generally better investments anyway.
Yeah,
houses than
yeah.
flats.
And
I have one other question.
Yeah,
Sorry.
that's all right.
The people that are going to be able to live in them, what is the policy going to be on things like alcohol and drugs?
no drugs. I don't know. Yeah, we aim for probably low to mid risk level, primarily because we are putting church volunteers in the, you know, not living in the houses but visiting those houses, and there's levels of risk and responsibility that go with that. But it's down to each individual church. So part of what Hope Interaction aims to do, so even in Southampton, it's not that City Life are going to run everything. We will employ the empowerment worker, and we'll do the admin side and collect the rent and do the evictions and do those kind of things. But the aim would be that we open up houses in partnership with churches. So if you had like 6 volunteers from Above Bar, for example, who had a particular passion for a particular group of people, whether that was ex-offenders or street homeless, or, you know, those coming out of rehab, or you know, women fleeing, you know, domestic abuse or whatever, then we would look to house those kind of people in that house, and then support volunteers to through the empowerment worker to befriend and build community and the like. So the other thing that attracts me with Hope Interaction is they're quite broad in terms of who they house, because it's down to the churches. So they have housed you know, refugee families, you know, Syrian refugees coming over. They've housed ex-offenders. They've housed, you know, street homeless, those coming out of rehab, you know, women-only houses, whether that is those out of sexual exploitation or fleeing domestic violence or whatever it might be. And for me, that's a really good fit. So as a church, we run a project working with refugees. We've been on the streets, you know, working with the homeless for the last 17 years. We run Amber, which is a chaplaincy service to women who are being sexually exploited. You know, we've got, it's a nice fit in the middle of it. So we could potentially run 3 houses ourselves just to connect with those projects.
Does City Life run Amber?
Yeah.
Nikki does that.
Yeah.
I know. I've been trying to find my way into getting in touch with them,
Okay.
and it doesn't matter how I've tried. I've got nowhere
Nikki.
fast.
Yeah.
Go through Dan.
Yeah.
Go through Nikki and Dan.
I've even got Nikki's number.
Show off, Olive.
Yeah. So
I'll forward you.
it's a good fit for us.
So the empowerment worker would be somebody local. I mean,
Yeah.
it's not somebody who comes in from.
So on the franchise light model, it was you'd have volunteers, somebody else would employ the empowerment worker, and they would have to come in, or they would employ somebody locally. But when you're starting up, it's not a big number of hours.
No,
It's not a full-time role for one house.
no.
so yes, but it would be local.
Mm.
And we've got people in mind for that. I took some people up to the training recently, one of whom used to work for the Salvation Army in one of the hostels,
Mm.
and is quite keen to be involved. And he now also works for Greenhouse, our social enterprise. So our hope is that tenants in the house will be able to engage in the social enterprise.
Yeah.
It will give them confidence and skills and something to do with their time and potentially employment at the end of it.
Mm.
So yeah. So the other thing about the houses is, so I know we were talking about 2-bed flats and 2-bed houses. Many of the houses have gone down that route, but the ideal model, which we would aim for, either the ideal or a little compromise, is that each tenant has 2 private rooms.
Mm.
One as a bedroom, one as a lounge, effectively. But it allows them then to reconnect with family. It allows them to build relationships, have people stay over.
Mm.
I mean, it's obviously all monitored and all that kind of stuff. But so the aim would be for two tenants, you'd have a 3-bed house with 2 reception rooms. You don't have to have that. If it was a 3-bed house and say 1 reception room downstairs, that's doable because you could have 1 room each, and then 1 room that is the spare room that they can have people over. You just can't have people together.
And do they share the kitchen?
Yeah, so they'll share a kitchen and they'll have some communal living space as well. So we wouldn't want each tenant to have 2 rooms and then just the kitchen. You'd want some other space where they can sit and actually engage with each other and build relationship. And unlike some, they have had houses with more than 2 tenants. But as soon as you do that, you multiply the number of relationships. It goes up exponentially. So you have 2 people. It's quite a simple dynamic. As soon as you've got 3 people, it's gone up because you've got, one person's got a relationship with each of those, and they've got, multiple relationships. As soon as you've got 4 people, it becomes incredibly complex. And if any of them have any kind of paranoia, which is not uncommon, then that makes for difficult relationships. So having just 2 tenants, which is probably where we'll start. We may go for a 3-tenant house later on when we're feeling more confident. You never know.
Tried it out.
Yeah, or a family house. You could do that.
Yeah.
But we're aiming to start with a 2-tenant house, and the model would then be you'd have 4 to 6 volunteers who act as befrienders, who will go in on a weekly basis. So it's quite a commitment. We ask everyone for a minimum of an hour per week to do that, to go in and meet people. They might write up some field notes, just so we've got some notes and other people know what's going on. And then there's other potential volunteering opportunities around kind of admin and marketing and all that kind of stuff, which are non-tenant facing. And then it's all underpinned in prayer.
Yeah.
So all the volunteers and staff would be praying together weekly as well. So yeah, it's quite a commitment. And actually at the beginning, when if a church takes on a house like we're going to do, it is down to the church rather than the project, rather than say Hope Interaction, to then decorate and furnish it and all that kind of stuff. So the church then kind of take ownership to a degree and make it homely.
Yeah.
So it's not like just some landlord has shoved the worst bits of furniture in, and painted everything magnolia. They've kind of made it homely.
It's a different league.
Yeah. Sign up with a cake maybe on moving in day, whatever it might be. So then it's quite empowering then as a church, and then they've got a vested interest once they've done that. They want to know how it's going, which is very helpful, rather than you feeling like you're forcing information on people that they actually want to know. So the way they've set up, I think, it to me seems very positive, and they're very helpful in making it a reality and providing training and a listening ear. And there's quite a network now across the country. So we're directly connected with guys over in Mid Sussex now because they've been there and done it for a bit, and they oversee a number of houses, and they're looking after a few regions. So they're our kind of main connection if we need help. And then there's further afield. There's people up in Norwich kind of area who have kind of broadened their role, but they've they've opened in 22 cities now, and they've got 65 houses, I think. So the expertise and the knowledge is growing. You know, having gone up there over the weekend, over the beginning of the week, they've set up some good systems. So it's, you know, they're using kind of SharePoint to document everything, and you know you can access a whole load of stuff that you didn't even know was there before. And they have, you know, lots of internal communications and encouragements, and everyone's very friendly and on the end of the phone or an email, and very willing because they all know what it's like because they've been there. So we're right in the early days. I've got a few kind of admin kind of bits to sort out and get a website sorted and get Facebook up and running and start getting communication out, and I've got a few other groups to go and visit, and I've got to try and sort out finance so that we've got some money to employ someone, and then and in the midst of it look for a house, and then get it renovated. I haven't bought a house since I bought my house, and that was, I don't know, 17 years ago. I fell out of practice. Most people, you know, that I know seem to move more regularly than that, but not me. So.
We might have to. It might be a good idea when you do get one up and running. I think we're the only ones in the city that do the CAP life skills course,
Right.
which would help to teach them budgeting and cooking.
Yeah. Great.
You'll get me life skills in there eventually.
Yeah. And we've got a direct connection with Frontline because they're in our building, but they don't do any lifestyle. They don't do the cooking side. They do the budgets, but that's about it.
Yeah.
So, more connections better.
Exactly.
So I connected with the Mayors recently. I don't know if you've heard of them. So
They've got
in Mayors they work with the homeless, but they're the ones that have got the big shop by the tip in Winchester.
they've got one in Shirley,
They've got a
opposite
shop,
the old
haven't
I've seen the name somewhere.
yes, Jensen Road.
Yeah. So, but I've connected with them recently because one of the things they do with some of their ex-homeless folks who they're housing is they go and decorate and furnish houses.
Oh wow.
That may well come in handy.
Yes.
So we've got a few connections that are beginning to build. I need to build a few more of those, and then get a good, secure foundation for us getting up and running. Not really sure what else to say. I've got some leaflets and things that you can have.
Brilliant.
Unfortunately, our printer, for some bizarre reason, even though all of the toner cartridges said they were full, decided it couldn't print red today, which is unfortunate
Okay.
because red is their primary colour. For
Oh well.
that's a red logo. These are red, not orange. This I printed at home because I couldn't find it in time. That's printed red, but nothing else has. So these are their kind of general leaflets, which they've got a giving form in the back, but it's not for Southampton because we haven't yet got to the stage where we've got our own publicity or can edit this. So instead, I printed off one of these. So these are going to go with these, but you don't really have to give or anything. But I'm just going to put them with them. And with all the fun GDPR stuff at the moment, I have actually had printed proper little contact cards. Because we have to, you know, if you do want to be kept up to date with stuff, I'm going to have to prove that you said it.
Yeah.
And I can't just pass around the list anymore because you can see each other's email addresses if you do that. And that's
Which
not
is
allowed.
quite
That's
amusing.
not
Well,
allowed.
considering
That
they all
is
actually
what
know
Ed
each
did
other.
at the Jubilee conference, didn't he? He
Yeah.
just
Was
passed round
Was that before GDPR kicked in April? Was it after that?
No,
No,
that was
it's
in
not.
November.
Yeah.
I'll give you one of those.
I think
I have got spares,
Thank you.
although they are orange, so they're not officially on brand.
We don't mind, we're not colourists.
Who actually designed that and wrote it?
So all of that's was done centrally. So
Oh, I'm so gonna love this.
yeah,
I do
What?
proofreading. Spot the deliberate mistake.
I know I've spotted
When
a
it
few.
Oh, I
comes
can't
down to
read
church
it.
support group,
The local church members.
What is does best rather than what is
Oh,
does
yes.
best.
Yes.
Unfortunately, there's a few things I've spotted like that. I can't change it, and it may even be in one of these leaflets.
oh really?
Have a look at that diagram may be in here. It is.
Oh yeah, if there's any mistakes, I'll find it.
No, it is in the leaflet.
Well, yeah, but it's too small for me to read.
Yeah, I
anyway.
know.
Um,
It's
there are then these as well. So they did they've got a specific one about housing refugees, which a lot of the information is exactly the same, but you are welcome to it anyway.
Please. I'm actually off to look after doing a week
I'm hoping
in Lebanon with Syrian
Yeah, sure.
refugee
Thank you.
children.
Yeah, okay.
I'm hoping our second house is going to be a refugee one. So Clear is a refugee project we run, but it's the